Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, I'm hosting again my good friend and amazing narrator, Mortis Media. We are also running again a competition in which one of you will win an exclusive signed print of the artwork you see now on screen. The only thing you have to do is subscribe to me and Mortis Media, and also leave a comment and a like on this video and on the video on Mortis Media channel. The link is in the description and on the end of this video. So, as always, grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. This story is about my dad's ex-girlfriend. My dad had horrible luck with women. He's like a crazy magnet. Every woman he has ever dated have been abusive, both mentally and physically. This list includes my mother, but this story is about his last girlfriend, Mary. She has gone from stalking not only him, but me, my husband, and our daughter too. They met at a Christmas party and hit it off. He just gotten out of another bad relationship with a different woman that he had been on and off with for 3 years. She was the classic narcissist type, while Mary seemed different. She claimed she was also just out of an abusive relationship. They went out for a few months, but she never let Dad over to her place. He didn't find it all that weird until he received a call from a man who said Mary was his wife and who wanted to know how my dad knew her. At first, Dad thought the guy was her ex, still trying to control her, but things started to add up. He finally confronted Mary, and she gave him some sob story about how her ex was refusing to sign the papers, but they were separated. Dad did a bit of digging and even talked to Mary's parents at one point. He found out that not only was Mary definitely still married, but she wasn't even separated from her husband. As far as everyone in her life knew, she was happily married and my dad was just a friend, if they knew about him at all. Needless to say, he broke up with her. She lost it, started showing up at his work, calling in the middle of the night, texting him 50 times a day. All that good stuff. My dad moved states twice and changed his number several times to try and get away from her, but she always found him. Love letters would arrive in the mail, or she would call and say she was coming to see him. Then she found my phone number. Probably sometime after my dad moved in with me. She started texting me almost as much as him. Once I married my husband and had my daughter, she really went all out, sending me presents for her new granddaughter, always wanting updates and the like. I never replied and either sent back unopened packages or donated the items she had sent directly to me from shops. Everything finally came to a head when she arrived on my dad's doorstep while he was at work with a casserole for him. She gave it to his roommate and told him it was because she noticed that my dad was losing weight. He told his roommate to toss it. He didn't want to risk poison since he had just applied for a restraining order. Then, one night she showed up at my apartment while my husband worked the overnight shift. It was after 1 a.m. when she started knocking on my door. I was glad that I had sent my toddler to my aunt and uncle's. When I saw it was her, she left banana bread on my doorstep that we threw out as soon as my husband got home. The next night, I again left my toddler with my aunt in case she came back. She did. I started getting texts from her as she pounded on my door. She wanted to see her grandbaby and have some girl time with me. Then, they slowly devolved into demands for me to open the door. I called the cops. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, my neighbor came out ready to take her on. He told her the cops were on the way, since his wife was already calling them. She disappeared pretty quick into the park across the street. The cops didn't catch her, but my dad's restraining order did get granted. We have since moved across the state, but she still texts me from time to time, wanting to know how my dad is or what my daughter is up to. I never answer, but I do save all of her texts just in case I have to get my own restraining order as well.
Okay, so this all happened about 3 years ago, give or take. I was around 17 years old. I am not going to dramatize anything, but let me go ahead and say that I think, personally, that this is a pretty bizarre story. There are some details about my actual relationship I'm going to leave out. My ex-girlfriend Jane and I lived about an hour away from each other. We met at a park out of state and ended up living kind of close. We hit it off and dated a month after we met. Our entire relationship lasted a year, and she was my first girlfriend. From the very beginning of the relationship, she would discuss her best friend named Patrick. He was in his late 20s, and she, as a reminder, was 17, and worked in a bookstore. He lived in her town, and had known him since she was 13. From very early on, I thought the stories she would tell about him were outlandish. She would talk about watching him get into bar fights with a guy that went by the name Hammer, how once they pretended to rob a gas station but left money on the counter, and had to jump off a roof to escape security, in which Patrick broke his ankle. On another occasion, Patrick got a brand new Mustang that they wanted to crash into a lake, so they jumped out of it at the last second. This tale she told me towards the end of our relationship, at which point I was completely skeptical of everything she said. You get the idea. The stories she said were clearly exaggerated or downright fake. Part of me thought she was just trying to impress me for whatever reason. Here are some other important facts that I don't really know where to put, so I'll put them here. Jane was an artist. She drew all the time, in her journal and on little notes. She rarely drew people, as they actually were anyway. She drew people as monsters or animals. For example, she always drew me as a giraffe. She was good at it. Patrick's last name, according to her, was pronounced and spelt a certain way. Willington. Patrick Willington. Patrick's dad owned a successful company out of state that Patrick would inherit. Jane had a much older brother, who was in his late 20s as well, that had joined the military and moved out to Korea. She only saw him every few years or so. Okay, back to the story. Jane would tell me that Patrick was very protective of her. She would tell him about me, and he would always be unsure of what he thought. She said he wanted to beat me up sometimes, and that he'd hurt me if I hurt her. If she told him about something silly I did, he'd think I was an idiot and call me stupid. He also thought I was gay. This is, of course, all second-hand information. Never once in the entire relationship do I think I spoke to him. I'd also like to remind everyone that this was my first relationship. I was very insecure, very confused, and there was more going on in that it complicated some things. I did not have the best rationality, as you may have deduced from how weird this sounds. The thing is, I really did have no reason not to believe her. She had no reason to lie about any of this, but I was still skeptical. Sometimes, Jane would go to Patrick's house really late at night. She said she'd sometimes sleep on his couch, and that he would literally throw her out of the house in the morning. Sometimes said she had to sneak out of her house to go to his. He lived within walking distance apparently. One time later in the relationship, Patrick invited her on an out-of-state trip back to his hometown. They were going to stay in a mountain cabin for a week. I was not happy about that. I was more upset when she said she wouldn't tell her parents and that they'd leave on a bus in the morning. Now, at this point in the relationship, I was very unsure of what exactly was going on with this Patrick person. But if Jane said that if I told her parents about the trip, that she would be unable to go, and that Patrick would hate me and she'd be pissed. It was important to her, because Patrick apparently would be forced to move away soon to work at his dad's company, and she said she'd never see him again, so she needed to go. Well, when the day came for her to leave, as I also discussed this with friends and family at the time, Patrick never showed up to get her or whatever. She was very upset, even though he'd be back in town one more time. Oh, another tidbit. Jane's parents never once mentioned Patrick. Ever. She never brought him up around either. The only time she mentioned Patrick to anyone else was to my dad, once, after we broke up. She told my dad one of the outlandish stories I mentioned. Why she met my dad after we broke up is for a different, unrelated reason. My dad was flabbergasted. Basically, I had told him about all of this, but hearing it in person was crazy. Patrick was supposed to have a birthday party once, before the mountain cabin trip thing happened. I was invited, and it was going to be at his house starting at midnight. I said I couldn't go to that, but that I'd get him a present. I got him some toolkit thing she said he'd like, and I gave it to her for him. She said she brought it, and that he did in fact like it. She said the party lasted until 6 a.m. Patrick sent me a text from her work phone once, when she was with him. It was standard behavior for him. He said I was a pansy or something, and that he would beat me up, and that was early on. I know things are getting out of order. I'm just trying to say them as I remember. Now here is where things get very interesting. Jane lived nearby an elementary school. She walked with me there and said his house was close. So she leads me to the back of the school where there is woodlands. She brings me to the edge of the woods and has me look in. I see a very old wooden tin house structure. It has broken windows, is filthy, and is falling apart. The path to it is covered by bushes and trees. She said that was the house. Oh, and at that point he had apparently moved out of state completely. I asked if she was joking, and she said no, and that he wasn't very tidy even when he did live there. I thought briefly that maybe the house was just funny looking on the outside, but actually good on the inside. But there was no way it was. It was abandoned. Anyway, that same day, she asked if I wanted to go inside. It was getting hot, getting dark, and no one knew exactly where we were, and I didn't want to get cut up by bushes or go into the sketchy house. So I said, politely, maybe another time. She insisted, saying that Patrick wanted us to check up on things, but eventually gave up, as this was close to the end of our relationship. I asked her a few more questions. You went through the bushes and stuff every time you went to see him? She said yes, but that they had overgrown since he left. I also asked about how he drove out of his house, how anyone else visited him, how he got his mail. She eventually realized that maybe I didn't exactly believe her and got angry. I said I was sorry and that it was just different to me, but she insisted it was all true. I let it go. Well, we ended up breaking up shortly after, but I had a hard time coping with the breakup and ended up speaking with her again later. She was on a bus with her class going on some trip. Well, I lost connection with her and called her back. A young man then answered. I asked who it was, and he said his name was Patrick Wilson, not Willington. So I opened up with a question about his last name, and also why he had her phone. He said that was always his last name, and said that he was on his office phone. I kept asking him questions about himself that only the real Patrick would know. I heard noises in the background. He would pause for a minute before answering. I think she just handed the phone to a classmate and told him what to say. Frankly, that's the only real answer to that. Well, he hung up and I called her back. Jane answered and said that Patrick told her I somehow got connected to his phone, since he was in her recent contacts or something. Clearly BS. But I played along, asking one more time about the last name, to which she said she had no idea what I was talking about, saying it was always Wilson, and left it at that. Oh, and he obviously wanted to beat me up, because I broke her heart. Well, I kept speaking to her for a week or two, and we both finally got closure about the whole thing. But I was recounting this experience with a friend, and realized something. Probably just a creepy coincidence. But I had saying Jane was an artist, and she always drew people as other things. Well, I saw many drawings of Patrick. She said he always wore this dark coat and ripped pants or something. She, as usual, didn't draw him as a human, she drew him as a skeleton. Really creeped me out for some reason. I tried using Google Earth to look at where his house was, since I remember exactly where she showed me. The trees are too thick to see in though, and there is construction nearby, so it may not even be accessible anymore. I've not gone back there in person since, as it's too far away, and also close to her house. I've Googled and researched countless Patricks in the way they were both said, and anything I could remember, to no useful results. She used to mention him on social media sometimes. A friend of mine who had trouble grasping all of this found her profile and saw him mentioned recently too. So I have a few theories. Patrick was just a sort of imaginary character that she made up to fill the place of her much older brother who moved away when she didn't often see him. Her brother and Patrick were the same age after all, and kind of had similar personalities, as I did meet her brother once. Secondly, it may have all have been bullshit she made up for whatever reason, to impress me sometimes, to coerce me other times. The third is that it was part of a much greater disorder or problem, which is possible as Jane did have them. Or 4, Patrick did exist only in some way, shape or form, but she highly exaggerated him and rarely saw him. So she told me whatever she wanted about him, and it may not be creepy to all of you since you're outside my social circle. But like I said, that's why I'm sharing this. Because to me, personally, I was really bothered by this. Jane had a tendency to be a very violent and threatening person. Why did she make all of it up? Why did she show me that house and say it was his? What was in the house? Regardless of if anyone lived there. Did she ever actually go in? Like she said she did? Did she sleep there sometimes? Or visit late at night? If so, what in the world was she doing? Did someone really somehow live there? Why did she draw him as a skeleton? Why did he have such strong feelings about me? Why did she change his last name? Why did she do all these weird things with the phone and the classmate? How many of her other loved ones knew about this? And what would have happened if I'd have gone into that house with her? Some of this is probably my heightened anxiety, but I do think it's a weird story. Either way, it's a relief that we're broken up. I was honestly tired of her litany of...
My psycho ex-stalker story happened on the west coast of the United States about 11 years ago. I was a 23-year-old female living in my very first apartment. I was single, working part-time and going to college, so I was more focused on getting my life together than dating. Valentine's Day was approaching, and of course, I didn't have a special someone in my life. So, a co-worker of mine thought it would be a good idea to hook me up with a single guy she knew, named Jack. Jack and I talked on the phone for a few days before meeting in person. When we eventually met, Jack brought flowers, candy, and told me immediately how attracted he was to me, even saying that I am his girl now. It struck me as kind of odd, as it was our first time meeting, but I thought he was really handsome. He had a gorgeous smile and seemed really sweet, so I just brushed it off. We hung out for a few weeks, and during that time, Jack started acting very strange and clingy. He was very quiet and liked to ask questions about me, and told me a lot about his personal life. He basically ignored and never spoke to any of my family and friends who came to visit often. He always wanted to occupy my time, wanted to know what I was doing all the time, and would get angry if I was busy or had other plans. He wasn't physically abusive, but really possessive. He even told me he loved me a month or so of knowing me, but I laughed it off thinking he was just joking around. One night, he actually got on his knees to propose to me. I told him we only been knowing each other for a few months, and we should wait until we are both ready, and besides, he didn't even have a ring. He said he was ready to get married as soon as possible. We can go to the courthouse now, and he will buy me a ring later. No thank you. The next week, he gets back on his knees, proposes, again, still no ring, and saying he was ready now. At this point, I started to freak out. Not only was he clingy, but he was moving way too fast for me. I mean, we only been knowing each other for a few months. I was still busy with work and school, so I told him maybe we should take a break from hanging out for a while. He got this really weird look on his face and got really quiet, and eventually started smiling and agreed with me that we should take a break. A few days of not hearing from him, I came home to find him sitting on my staircase. I asked what he was doing there, and he just said, "Waiting for you," and smiled. After an awkward moment of silence, I told him he needed to go home. He got up and left, but then he started to randomly stop by my place. If I was there, I pretended not to be. He would knock for about 13 minutes, leave for 5 minutes, and come back. He started waiting on my staircase for me to get home, so much I had to hide at a neighbor's apartment and wait until he eventually left. He called my cell non-stop and I just ignored him. After a couple of months of this, he just stopped all of a sudden. I was completely relieved, like he finally got the point. About 3 months of not hearing from him, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, and it was Jack. He wanted to know how I was doing and wanted to see me. He also said he told his mother about me and she wanted to meet me too. I got super creeped out and upset and I told him no, lose my number and stop calling me. I guess he heard the opposite because he started randomly knocking on my door again. He knocked on my door a couple of times and each time I had a friend or family member tell him to leave and to not come back, and each time he smiled and said okay. The third time he came over was the last straw for me. I had my best friend tell him I wasn't there. He asked her if he could wait for me inside my apartment until I got back. She told him no, and then he tried to push his way in. My friend called my name and I ran out to help her shut the door. Heart racing, I told him I was going to call the police if he didn't leave and to never come back again. He mumbled something through the door and then I could hear him walking down the stairs. I ended up not calling the police that night, but I regret that decision to this day. Jump forward about 5 or 6 months later. It was a bright sunny Saturday afternoon. 2 of my younger sisters, 17 and 14, were visiting. I was still laying in my bed because I had a major migraine. Since I lived alone, I had gotten used to leaving my bedroom door open so I could hear everything. I could hear them watching and talking about Vanilla Sky. I could also hear kids laughing and playing outside. Nothing weird whatsoever. I took more aspirin, then dozed off again, but was awakened shortly by a loud. At first I thought maybe a kid bounced a ball or something on my door. Then I heard again, and my sisters started yelling, "What the hell is that?" just as I was about to get up to go see what was going on. I heard screaming and then a man's voice yelling, "Get the fuck up!" I started to panic, so this part might sound kinda fucked up, but since I had no clue what was going on or who the persons were, I slowly closed my door, blocked it with a dresser, sat on the floor in front of the dresser, and called 911. In my state of mind, I thought it would be better to get the police ASAP, instead of risking my life even further by running into an unknown situation. Maybe this intruder didn't know it was a third person there. Anyway, I told the operator someone broke into my apartment and sounded like he was threatening my sisters and that the police needed to come quick. The operator asked me a lot of questions about how many or what the intruders looked like, but of course I could not say because I was still laying in my bed when it started. While I'm speaking with the 911, I could hear a guy's voice asking, "Where is your sister? She doesn't know what I had to do for her. I love her." I heard more screams and then I heard, "She's in the room." At that point, my heart started beating triple time. I don't know why they told this person where I was, maybe just out of pure terror, or maybe getting me back for not coming out my room to check on the situation. But the next thing you know, my bedroom door was being kicked. Hard. So hard, I actually thought I had started sliding across the floor. The intruder stops kicking my door and says, "If you don't open the door right now, I'm killing everybody." I was so damn scared, literally crying, begging and asking the 911 operator where the police were at. The whole ordeal was about 5 minutes, but in a situation like this, time slows way down and it seemed like it went on for hours. I guess the intruder must have heard me talking to 911 because all of a sudden he stopped and took off running out the apartment. I was still on the phone, crying with the door shut, and one of my sisters knocked and said it was okay to come out because he is gone. I opened my door and was like, "Who the fuck is he?" They said, "Jack." I could not believe it. In broad daylight, Jack kicked in my door and threatened to kill my sisters and myself. The police ended up catching him about a week or so later. During this time, I found out through the police report that there was a previous incident that occurred with Jack a couple of weeks before my incident. The police were called because someone was shooting a shotgun in the air. When the police arrived, they found Jack holding the gun. They asked why, and Jack said because someone broke into his apartment, stole his weed, and cut the tip of his tongue. Not kidding, the police just issued him a ticket. Anyway, I actually helped catch him. He confessed right there, but after he was arrested, he pleaded not guilty but ended up taking a plea deal and only ended up serving 5 years. I moved to a different state after that. An even scarier part is I found out that when he got released, he moved into a halfway house literally right down the street from my old apartment where he kicked my door in. 11 years have passed and I still don't feel completely safe. I feel at any moment I could run into him randomly or hear my door being kicked in again. I keep moving constantly. I change my number every year. I carry pepper sprays and tasers with me everywhere. And I never go to bed without checking if the doors and windows are locked tight. I still even put a chair under the doorknob before I go to sleep at night. So, to Jack who tried to kill me and my family, you are a piece of shit. I wish your psychotic ass would have rotten away in prison. I hope to never ever ever meet you again for the rest of my life. So this took place over a few years in a small Ohio town. I went to a real small high school and was all around pretty sheltered. I'd went on some dates but never had a real boyfriend until Dave came along. Dave was a popular senior, I was a junior, and many of his friends were dating my friends. Dave was a funny guy and a bit of a troublemaker, but he was very sweet to me. We hit it off and began dating. Dave lived with his foster dad, a man named Greg, who he'd lived with since he was 13 or so. Greg was not married, so it was just them and their dog. Greg worked as a counselor at an adolescent mental health center in town and was literally the kindest person I have ever met. I was interested in pursuing a similar field, so I really enjoyed spending time talking with Greg. At first, it was smooth sailing with Dave, but slowly, things got worse. Dave confessed to me that he was very depressed and often thought about killing himself. I was shocked and upset. I wasn't sure how to help. I told Greg about it, who assured me he would take care of things. He let me know that Dave had some mental issues and had been suicidal before. Now, I realize that could be a relationship red flag. But as it was my first boyfriend and I had also gone through some depression issues, I just felt obligated to help him through this time. I should add that Dave had previously told me a few very private stories about his abusive childhood, so overall, I just felt really bad for him. As time went on, we dated about 1.5 years. Dave became worse. He was verbally abusive and very sneaky. I was petrified of the dark, and he would delight in sneaking up and shutting all the lights off whenever we were in a windowless area. We lived a street apart, and at one point he began sneaking to my home at night time and asking me to let him come sleep over. My damn high school self did. I just continued to feel obligated to help this guy until one day I finally got the guts to cut things off. I told him it was over the day I graduated. I said I wanted to move on to a new stage in my life and all that. He begged and begged, saying he would be better. I didn't buy it, and I basically told him I didn't want any type of contact. Of course, he threatened suicide over and over via text, but I finally got the strength to ignore it. I found out later Greg had called Dave, taking Greg's gun from safe, but nothing tragic happened. Now, this is where shit gets real. I had moved to a town 25 minutes away to attend school. My roommate Jenny was a high school friend who happened to be dating a scumbag from our hometown who sold drugs. Since this dude was still in high school and could not drive, he didn't really come over, but she would go stay with him. She would come back and tell me she saw Dave buying drugs from her boyfriend, and Dave would always ask about me all creepy. She knew better than to tell him stuff, especially when he asked where our new place was. And thank goodness, because what happened next still give me chills. One April night, I get a call from my mom. She said I need to get out of my apartment and stay with a friend, because Dave had just killed someone and was still on the loose. My mom was bested with the police chief's wife, so she had the scoop. I asked what had happened, and my mom told me the unthinkable. Greg had been found in his basement freezer. Dave had beat him to death, then escaped before anyone discovered the body. I could hardly believe the gruesome news and immediately left my apartment. The next afternoon, I received the news that Dave had been caught. They found him at a rundown motel a few miles from my apartment. I'll never know if Dave was coming for me, but my gut tells me he was. If this dude was on a killing spree, I'd no doubt I was going to be his second target. I wanted so badly to know the truth. I went to a visitation while he was still in the county jail, one of those glass with a phone sort of thing. But once I got there, I just broke. I could not pick up the phone, and plus there were others there to talk to him. I never did get the chance to ask, but I will never forget as the officers led him back to his cell. He turned around one last time and looked me dead in the eye. Still gives me shivers. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. Click the link below to go to Mortis Media channel and participate on the contest. Also, don't forget to click the bell notification icon because YouTube lately doesn't like to notify anyone. Take care, and I will see you all in my next video.